Welcome to Plato's Cave. I'm Jordan Myers, and I'm a master's student in philosophy at the University of Houston. You're listening to a reading group episode of the show, which means that in this episode, I discuss the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy entry on moral responsibility and determinism with two non-philosopher friends, Adam and Giffen, because philosophy shouldn't just be for philosophers. So this is the second episode in the Free Will and Moral Responsibility series, and today it's kind of a follow-up on the first episode, the review of Sam Harris's Free Will. This episode is kind of clarifying some concepts and drilling down on exactly what the three of us believe at the beginning of the series. So with that in mind, I hope that this episode is an educational one for you. I know recording it was for me. As with the first, this episode is audio only. That will soon change, and it was also recorded well over a year ago, so my position has changed pretty drastically from the one I espoused in this video. So with that introduction, I really hope that you enjoy the episode. For listeners, we should say that the only thing we really read here is I printed out, or I sent you guys a couple just different sections from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy on two sections, determinism and free will. If listeners want to follow along, it's just Google those two things and you'll be able to find the sources. At least what I'm kind of viewing this as is obviously kind of a close in the loop or a part two on the first episode, figuring out all the questions that we had in terms of just like what exactly we mean by certain terms about free will as we move into compatibilism and moral responsibility. So that even if we do differ at the end of this episode, at least we understand how we differ and what the other people think. And that'll be interesting, actually, moving through like the other readings if we do disagree.
Sure.
At the end of this. Okay, cool. But okay, so here's kind of how I'm viewing this, because I have like a couple questions from the last episode written down. But the first thing that I think that we need to pin down is where we all stand on the following questions. So the way I'm understanding things, at least from like a 30,000 foot view, is that the first question that begins the branch off is, do you find determinism incompatible with free will? Which is to say, are you an incompatibilist or not on determinism and free will? And if the answer is yes, then we have to decide if you say that, okay, determinism is incompatible with free will, but we do have free will, i.e. the libertarian position, or if you say yes, they're incompatible, and we don't have free will, i.e. the incompatible determinist position. And then if you answer no to the question of is determinism incompatible with free will, okay, then you're just some sort of a compatibilist, i.e. like, maybe the Dennett style, or there's a bunch of other different styles. And we don't have to figure out that in this episode. There are other, readings we can do on that. But then So then, free will is being redefined to mean something other than libertarian freedom. Do you guys agree with how I'm kind of viewing the 30,000 foot view of this?
Yeah,
Okay.
I think those are good frames.
Okay, so Adam, I remember the one thing that like after the episode we were talking, and I remember you wanted and it was a fair ask, like a strict definition of what we mean by some terms, and I think one of the terms was determinism, right?
Maybe not that one in particular, but I'd love to hear a good definition.
Okay. So I came up with the one that I think is the non-jargon filled version of it, right? Just from like the reading that we had, and I don't think it goes against any of the reading, but just this is how I'm thinking about it. In terms of like the free will debate, determinism means that there is this fact that everything about any individual's composition or origin can be traced back to factors that they did not author or cannot causally own. So for instance, genetics, parents, place of birth, culture of birth, time of birth, sun radiation, etc., right? The point is not that we can know any of these specifically and whether or not they led to any given thought or action, but we simply know that there are causes like this that do exist. That's what I mean by determinism. Do you guys have a problem with that as kind of the working definition moving forward?
No.
I don't think so, but I mean, maybe this is kind of playing devil's advocate. But Jordan,
Sure.
do you happen to like know places where there might be disagreement on like that definition?
There are some people. If you press me for a name, I won't be able to give you one. I've heard arguments before where some people try to wiggle out of determinism the second part of my definition where I said, okay, it's not the point that we're able to know what cause led to what outcome,
Right.
but just the mere fact that there are causes. So some people have said that no, it's like the mystery of the causes is what grants us freedom. I don't find that very compelling at all.
Yeah.
Because it's just open to more information, right? It's not, you're not denying that like the information exists. You're just denying that we know it.
Okay.
That seems to be a bit spurious as a distinction for me.
Okay. Yeah, I figured I'd ask, but that's not compelling.
The only other thing that the only other thing I was going to add is that when I say determinism, I'm not actually super concerned with whether randomness factors into it. I include randomness in deterministic causes, even though it's technically indeterminate, but in the sense that randomness would be that which determines any given action. So I could say determinism plus randomness, or I could just say determinism, and I'm kind of meaning the same thing. The other way that I think about it is the necessary and sufficient condition of determinism is that if you were to pause and rewind the universe to a previous state and hit play again, nothing would unfold differently. Or if it did, then that was due to randomness. So that kind of clarifies how the randomness fits in. Do you guys have an issue with that either?
No.
Okay, nice. So I've rambled a lot, but I wanted to just kind of lay out how I was viewing determinism and then how I was viewing the conversation. So the one thing that I remember we didn't exactly know where we fell on was, Adam, if you were advocating for some sort of libertarianism or if it was something more akin to a type of compatibilism.
I think it began compatibilism, then I began to flirt with libertarianism, but then I ended in compatibilism. So that's where I ended and finished up. But the road along the way did veer a little bit into libertarian free will. Yeah.
So just to close the loop on our previous conversation, where do you stand on the claim that, because I think you disowned it, but I just want to understand, like, for the rest of the series moving forward, where do you stand on the claim that when a thought arises, that obviously arises from just, non-free darkness, and it just happens to arise? But I think you said, what was the phrase? It was like modified by consciousness, or it bounces off consciousness, and that's where the libertarian freedom comes. Is that still something that you're clinging to, or are you viewing that in more of a compatibilist state now?
A compatibilist state. Like okay. I still stand by that notion.
Okay.
But definitely through a compatibilist lens, yeah.
Because the reason why I was confused is before, because I agree that that's like a very worthy distinction of holding. But I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but there was a little bit of at least flirtation, like you said, with that being a libertarian source of freedom.
I'm going to push back a little bit. No.
Okay.
The libertarian source was when we got to the point where you asked, could things have been different? Could things have been different? Could you have decided differently? And I said, I don't know.
Okay. Could you have done otherwise? Yeah.
Yeah. But then I've come around to agree that I don't see any other way. But no. With that argument, there was never any indication of libertarian free will. Yeah.
Okay. That helps, because I couldn't remember. I didn't re-listen to the episode. I couldn't remember where the libertarian freedom was coming from.
That came in at that location.
So. Okay. So what? Just honestly remind me, if it's also good for the listeners, what was the change from resisting the conclusion that we could not have done otherwise to admitting that there is no could have done otherwise?
Well, I think actually it's maybe important to mention it first that actually I didn't say I don't know. I said maybe, which is an important distinction.
That's true.
Because I left the possibility a little more open with maybe than I don't know.
Definitely.
Fair distinction.
So that is important to mention. But, well, I mean, we just kind of explored by which course could someone have chosen differently.
And the doors just were closed off.
They were closed off, yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. Also, the other thing that I liked in the reading, and I think the Harris book mentions it, but we didn't mention it, or did we? Did we give a brief aside about fatalism or not in the previous episode?
Yeah.
We did. Okay, so I don't need to mention that then.
I think it was pretty brief. I think it'd be worth mentioning again, personally.
Yeah, well, the fatalism is slightly akin to what I was saying about not being able to know any of the causes led to any specific conclusions, but that's simply that there are. And I don't know about you guys, but like, because I know Adam and I have been talking about free will for like several years at this point, but Adam, I'm curious, the number one reaction that I've gotten when discussing free will is I advocate for determinism. And people instantly kind of strawman that with fatalism. Have you encountered that as well?
To be honest, like the typical encounter I get is, then why are you even talking about this? You know what I mean?
Very fatalistic, yeah.
Like, if you don't, decide what you do ultimately, then why have you been having this conversation?
Yeah, which is funny because I mean that person is not understanding, what I'm saying precisely due to no free will of their own. Like, you know what I mean? You can't. Yeah. So fatalism. I'll just quote from the Stanford Encyclopedia. It says fatalism. It says Stanford. Fatalism is the thesis that all events, or in some versions at least, some events are destined to occur no matter what we do. The source of the guarantees that those will events happened is it located in the will of the gods, their divine foreknowledge, or some intrinsic teleological aspect of the universe, rather than the unfolding of events under the sway of natural laws or cause-effect relations. Fatalism is therefore clearly separable from determinism. And to me, all that's saying is a bit fancier language than no. Like people are misconstruing the fact that it's not whether we can know. It's not about predictability. It's about understanding that there just are causes, that we are nothing more than causes.
Yeah, I think it's explained well in that sentence just by kind of the contrast made between teleological approaches and causal approaches, in the sense that teleological kind of explaining events by their outcomes and through their causes, which determinism attempts to explain things by.
Like everything that we talk about in the subsequent episodes is not going to have to do with predictability. It's about determinism. So I actually thought, I don't know, I thought this reading was a little bit technical, a little bit jargony, but it did actually bring out some very good distinctions. And one of those was under the section, the freedom to do otherwise. So they talk about, now remember I said at the beginning of, I think it was the beginning of last episode maybe, when we ask are you a compatibilist, there's two possible things we can be asking that about. We can be asking, do you think determinism is compatible with free will? And do you think moral responsibility is compatible with determinism? What we're talking about in this episode is compatibilism between determinism and free will. So they kind of introduce like a couple different ways to look at the freedom to do otherwise, which I don't know about you guys, but for me, that really is kind of where the crux of the debate lies, right? Is like, if you have no freedom to do otherwise, then you can say you mean something else by free will, but you're kind of changing the subject at that point.
Well, I do think it depends on framing. So I felt like a pretty good quote. This is not my quote. Just doing a little side reading, and I felt like this, at least to me, did a good job of kind of explaining what I meant. But let me just read it here. People do have an ability to rationally choose among options to the extent that they can represent options to themselves and choose between them according to processes of rational deliberation.
Who is
Like,
that, by the way?
it was someone who, I forget the exact website, but someone was just like,
Jay Peterson.
Peter Song.
no, it's somebody's thesis, but I liked it though.
Oh, interesting.
I liked the way it was put though.
Yeah, yeah.
So, and that for me, like, I don't think that's like a trivial distinction there, right?
No.
Do you kind of see where I'm coming from there?
Can you repeat it? Actually, I
Yeah.
don't think I grasped what
Yeah.
you're trying to explain.
So people do have an ability to rationally choose among options to the extent that they can represent options to themselves and choose between them according to processes of rational deliberation.
Okay.
So, does that make sense there?
I mean, I think that makes sense. I'm just curious how you're gonna frame that going forward. I think.
Well, the other way to put this is like in the literature, people refer to this as reasons responsiveness.
Yeah.
Okay.
And a lot of people will put that forth as a condition. Either now, this is where it's interesting because people will put that forth as both a condition for some compatibilist notion of freedom, and people will also put that forth as a necessary and sufficient condition for moral responsibility. So it's actually used two different ways in two different like debates, which is interesting. I think that distinction is much more relevant for the debate we're going to have than about free will. That to me is a distinction not about freedom, but more about the types. It's not about free will. It's more about sort of the I don't want to use the word freedom that people have because that kind of conflates it with like free will, but that to me is more of an indication of the category of person you're dealing with, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that actually makes a lot of sense to me because I asked you to repeat like the sentence because I wasn't 100% sure if it was like kind of saying anything about free will, and it didn't really seem to me, at least the way I was kind of interpreting the words. But Jordan, I think that was an excellent explanation, and I think we should definitely bring that back for the conversation on moral responsibility.
Because I just think, like Adam, I'm curious what you think to what I said, but I just think that bringing that into, because it's a very important distinction to hold. It's very important. But to bring that into the free will debate, to me, seems a little bit misplaced. It says other philosophers see them, reasons to doubt in free will, as reasons to favor a more modest free will agnosticism, or to promote revisionism about the folk idea of free will. And that's pretty common, actually, where a lot of philosophers will say, well, of course, there's no libertarian free will, but, we always knew determinism was true anyway, and we shouldn't really kind of acquiesce to the lay person's notion about free will. And it's like, I get that view, but the problem is like, I don't think that makes a lot of sense because there are a small subset of people who, are libertarian free will advocates who are sophisticated philosophers, or at least sophisticated thinkers. And B, if the majority of kind of the lay population does believe in a concept, I don't know how we speak about it then if we are reducing kind of the jargon internal to the practice as something else. Do you know what I'm saying?
No,
Like,
I get what you're saying, and that's why definitions are important. Because I mean, it's like if you're defining free will ultimately as the ability to do otherwise, then no. Like it's
very simply no, yeah.
It's completely incompatible with determinism. But I don't know. I guess like the way I've been just kind of thinking about free will has been through this lens in a sense, right? So
yeah.
So if the idea is okay, if we're comparing or if we're assessing the layperson's view of free will, it does not exist, and it's completely incompatible. But to me, I've just given it some thought, and it's like maybe I've spent so much time now with free will talking about, or over the years and stuff like that. But it's not a very like stunning claim to me when we get to the point where it's like, okay, everything, has some sort of cause.
Mm-hmm.
That the reason you think about, a certain thing is based on, your environment, who you are as a person, your experiences, what happens to affect you at that time. And it's like, well, yeah. Yeah, I mean that just, happens to, coincide well with my own experience.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like I still want to preserve this aspect of it. And I think it's an important, at least for me, if that makes sense at all.
Can we run through really quickly then the three types of libertarian accounts of sourcehood?
Yeah.
Sure.
Even as if to table them to then push them off the table.
Okay.
There's three kind of main libertarian options for understanding sourcehood of self-determination. There's non-causal libertarianism, there's event-causal libertarianism, and there's agent-causal libertarianism. And this is in section 2.5. So it says, non-causal libertarians contend that exercises of the power of self-determination need not, or perhaps even cannot, be caused or causally structured. According to this, we control our volition or choice simply in virtue of it being ours. It's occurring in us. Now, obviously, that doesn't really hold any weight for, us. Because it's just like, read that again. Non-causal libertarians contend that exercises of the power of self-determination need not be caused or causally structured. I don't even know what to make of that claim. It's like, what are you ascribing to it then? Like, how could something not have any cause?
It's like as though they're imagining some being in perfect isolation, with no influence of an environment.
But the funny thing is about that, like, I have serious skepticism about whether that would subjectively feel like free will, though. Like, it would almost have to kind of just come from nowhere. Do you know what I mean?
It might feel like it come from nowhere.
But imagine you kind of making a choice that, like, it's just like, what the hell came over me? Like, that would be your experience of everything, right? It's like, I don't know how you would kind of have an identity under that view. But apparently, so the funny thing is, though, is that seems to be, we can discuss it, but that seems to be what I would ascribe most people's lay assumption to, is that non-causal, or sometimes called contra-causal, source of libertarianism. Just a quick intrusion, or a bit of an update. So this is Jordan, as I'm editing this episode several months later, and I just wanted to supplement that quote that I read. So this is in section 2.5 of the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy under the entry free will. So I'll start with that original quote, talking about non-causal libertarians. The SEP says, non-causal libertarians contend that exercises of the power of self-determination need not, or perhaps even cannot, be caused or causally structured. According to this view, we control our volition or choice simply in virtue of its being ours, its occurring in us. We do not exert a special kind of causality in bringing it about. Instead, it is an intrinsically active event, intrinsically something we do. While there may be causal influences upon our choice, there need not be, and any such causal influence is wholly irrelevant to understanding why it occurs. So it seems to be saying, A, non-causal libertarians might doubt that there are causes influencing us, but B, even if they do influence us, they cannot be sort of the determining factor, for lack of a better word. So continuing, or repeating, while there may be causal influences upon our choice, there need not be. And any such causal influence is wholly irrelevant to understanding why it occurs. Reasons provide an autonomous, non-causal form of explanation, provided our choice is not wholly determined by prior factors. It is free and under our control simply in virtue of being ours. Non-causal views have failed to garner wide support among libertarians, since for many, self-determination seems to be an essentially causal notion. Okay, so that last sentence is indicating to me that this has nothing to do with the concept of causa sui, or self-causation or self-determination. This more seems to be, and honestly, I'm not sure that I'm fully understanding this view, and maybe it's something I need to follow up on. But it seems to be this sort of almost godlike view of what you as an individual are able to do. It seems to be that you can just sort of through pure will influence yourself. I mean, that quote that I read again and expounded upon seems to indicate that. From that last sentence I read, it doesn't seem to be an issue of you determining your sources or self-determination. It seems to be some sort of, it says, an autonomous, non-causal form of explanation. Again, sorry for lack of understanding. I don't know if that's just me or if a lot of people, even in this field, might not know exactly what non-causal libertarianism implies. Perhaps the episode that I recorded with Seth Shabo might shed some light on this. That was episode, I believe, 27. So if listeners want to do that, they can check that out. Okay, back to the original discussion. But it continues. Most libertarians endorse an event-causal or agent-causal account of sourcehood. Both of these accounts maintain that exercises of the power of self-determination consist partly in the agent's bringing about her choice or action, but they disagree on how to analyze an agent's bringing about her choice. While event-causal libertarianism admits of different species, at the heart of this view is the idea that self-determining an action requires, at minimum, that the agent cause the action, and that an agent's causing his action is wholly reducible to mental states and other events involving that agent non-deviantly causing his action. Now, that's just ignoring the important part of the problem for me, right? It's like, it says the agent, at the heart of the issue is that the agent caused the action, and the agent's causing of that action is wholly reducible to mental states. It's like, okay, that's, yeah, totally true. Like, yeah, how else could you initiate action? It's totally your mental states. But the question is, like, are you responsible for any of those mental states? And are there causes for that? And of course there are. So that, I don't understand that view really at all. That view seems to just be missing the point. That makes sense as a compatibilist view, but as a libertarian view, that doesn't hold any water. The other thing to close the loop on that is event-causal libertarians need to believe that self-determination requires non-deterministic causation in a non-deviant way by an agent's reasons.
This made the least sense.
Yes, that made the least sense. It's like that just merely asserts that, like, we have some contra-causal power. It's like I have no reason to believe that we do. Like, I don't even know. That's almost incoherent to me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
And just finally, just to close the loop, because I do think it's nice to have these distinctions. Agent causal libertarianism seems to capture an aspect of the self-determination that neither the above compatibilist accounts nor event causal libertarian accounts capture. These accounts reduce the causal role of the self to states and events to which the agent is not identical, even if he is identified with them. This made no sense to me. There's a Richard Taylor, there's a quote from him. If I believed that something not identical to myself was the only cause of my behavior, some event wholly external to myself, for instance, or even one internal to myself, such as a nerve impulse, volition, or whatnot, then I cannot regard the behavior as being an act of mine unless I further believed that I was the cause of that external or internal event. So this is like, this seems to be grasping at being the cause of the causes in some weird way. And like the very next sentence is, it's funny, despite its powerful intuitive pull for some, many have argued that agent causal libertarianism is obscure or even incoherent. And I agree that it is both of those things.
Yeah.
So, okay, sorry to kind of derail us for a minute, but since we're officially just moving past libertarianism, I wanted to flush out those distinctions for any audience members who might feel the pull of libertarianism. what we were talking about before, where it's like, well, what really matters? Is it like compatibilist distinctions or libertarian distinctions? What really matters is a lot of the distinctions that we're talking about. But I am very skeptical about the idea that those distinctions, like the one you read, reasons, responsiveness, are distinctions to be made about the free will debate. I think that they are far more important for issues like moral responsibility, and that they belong much more in that debate.
I think it also just, at least for me, seems to kind of cohere nicely with the subjective feeling of free will, as how we would actually, like, if you actually were to examine how your brain functions. I feel like the deterministic model, like, although it's completely correct, I feel like doesn't actually use the language necessary to describe the experience of free will. And I think that through these compatibilistic terms, it helps to both address the ultimate causality, of that determines, like our actual actions, but also kind of keeps to the kind of descriptive feeling and kind of process of what we to kind of expect as, like, intelligent people, of what actually is this experience of, it seems like we're choosing between things, even if the thoughts that arise in our head ultimately we don't choose. So that was a bit convoluted, but
No, I think you're pointing. Well, just real quick,
Yeah.
like I think you're pointing to something that is obviously crucial for considerations of like interpersonal relationships or ethical considerations, which is like, okay, well, we need to be able to talk about like voluntary versus involuntary actions, for instance, or decisions that you really reasoned about versus split-second decisions, or things that you do out of like maybe habit or something like that, right? Like all of these distinctions are super important, and I agree. What I'm saying though is I just all of those things are very important distinctions, but to me they don't have anything to do with freedom, or free will. That all I think all of the things that we want to preserve about those distinctions are very happily imported into the moral responsibility debate.
I mean, yeah, I was just gonna say, well, I guess generally agreeing with you, Jordan, about all the points you brought up about like ethics and interpersonal relations and things like that. These are very important distinctions, right? They're not negligible. But I was actually going to ask Adam, like, if like the passage that he like read, that, to circle back before our discussion of like the libertarian like positions, I'm curious, Adam, if it actually informs anything about like your position on free will, because to me, like that the entire passage could be basically, you know, none of it contradicts the idea of the fact that we don't have free will. And
well,
so I'm just curious. I mean, maybe you already answered it with like your description of like the subjective, but maybe I just wanted to ask directly if it informed your free will thoughts.
I think you guys make really good points, but here's like kind of like the lens I'm viewing it through here. It's almost like, okay, I've adopted to some extent like a consequentialist viewpoint on ethics, right? I don't know why that ethics system ultimately appealed to me, but that's one that I've come to adopt based on who I am. So if I had like an interesting kind of moral question pop up just about a week ago, actually a day or two after we did the podcast, where I kind of thought about it and just examined my own thoughts just arise. And it was through that framework, and then I came to sort of a conclusion through that. Through that process, it's what I would call, certainly a free will experience, but maybe not ultimately free.
Would you agree with it, like characterizing what you're describing as the free will illusion? Because I mean, I would agree with you if you called it the illusion. Like, I'm just curious if that's equivalent to you.
I mean, I would say that, I'm not Well, like the cause, I'm not the cause. No,
Mhm.
like that is a fact.
That's obvious, yeah.
Yeah, sure. And the way that those thoughts impact me, like ultimately I have like no control over that either. But like the process itself, I guess it would be an illusion in that sense. So I guess it would have, but I feel it's a very strong illusion if I'm gonna make that claim. So, or if I'm gonna concede that it's an illusion, it's a very, very strong illusion. So
I can agree with that.
if, in
Do
my
you
my
here?
opinion,
Can I ask another question about that then?
yeah.
Because like, I'm just trying to think about. Let's make it amoral for a second, just so we can like actually talk about the details. So, for instance, obviously I'm doing like a grad school research right now, right? And that is a very rational endeavor, right? Like deciding kind of which schools I want to apply to versus not. And I'll be faced with a similar kind of thought process if I get into more than one program about which school to go to. It'd be a nice problem to have. But so even when I'm kind of exercising this reasons responsiveness and I'm looking at a school, so I just want to hear like how you might differ in your experience from this, Adam. So like I understand that obviously I don't understand why or I'm not causally responsible for like why I would value some things over others. Or even honestly why I'm interested. Like a big thing for me is, do the faculty have interests that align with my own, right? And and I don't know, like I have no idea why I'm interested in some areas of philosophy and not as much in others. But I know that I do, and so I want to evaluate and kind of rank schools based on that, based on their funding packages, based on their location, based on their placement record, based on all of these things, right? Like their other resources, their colloquia talks, all of these things, right? And that's a very reasons responsive process. But even if I think about any individual part of that, I do and kind of can experience that as a lack of freedom, right? Like if a reason occurs to me, like, oh wait, that school might not be good for like this reason, like that just kind of pops up, and if I accept it or not, that just kind of pops up, and then how it affects my further reasoning of, does anything else about the school overcome that, like that all of those just kind of pop up for me. Does that
So,
differ for you?
I mean, I just wanted to point out, and maybe Adam, you were going to point this out as well. I think there is like at least a bit of an experiential difference between like the idea that comes to your head kind
Hmm.
of popping up versus like the what you described as the popping up of like the decision you make. Because I feel like it's a little bit more
It's just it's like a little bit more bouncing versus just arising, but even the
right.
bouncing is it's the same
I mean, but
type of
the way it
experience.
feels like, I think, is like, you've come to the rational conclusion based on like inputs, right? Like,
Hmm.
as opposed to like, oh yeah, I totally forgot like the distance, like some random like
Or like
fact.
accidentally like touching like a hot stove or something. It's like shit, like I didn't mean to do, like
Yeah,
you
yeah.
like you did it,
Well,
just didn't mean to do it or something.
I'm not. I mean, we were thinking more about thoughts than actions, but I was
Yeah, you're
just.
right. You're
But I mean, the general gist of it is like the way it feels. Like, I guess the illusion is stronger whenever kind of like you quickly remember a
right.
fact or something versus whenever you kind of like are in the process of making the decision, right? Like if you're like, yes, I do want to apply to this school, it's like that's after like you've kind of maybe you've like made like the chart of like positives and negatives and like kind of like what resources you have to deal with, your list of preferences, like it makes the threshold. So it feels a little bit more.
Well, that's what I'm saying is like that distinction is so important. But for me, it doesn't really have anything to do with freedom.
Yeah, but I think you're also like, I don't know. I mean, I could be wrong about this, but I feel like you're also kind of like cutting out like an important, almost like middleman in this process as well. Like in the sense that like if you see a school like UC Boulder,
Uh-huh.
right? And like just like the natural, stunning beauty of the school just strikes and you're like, wow, I want to go here.
Hmm.
It's me, it's you're someone who loves nature.
Hmm.
So I feel like it's not like these thoughts and feelings are just arising out of nowhere. Actually, they kind of
No.
reflect who you are. So because like
Yeah. it's not surprising that I like it.
No, so like so my point is that like there's kind of like a continuity of character too over the course, 24 years of life, where it's like, okay, these things aren't just popping out of nowhere. It's who you are, which I think is, you're having, reactions based on who you are. Do you choose who you are? No. But it's not just like thoughts arise out of nowhere and I have no idea why they come out. Like,
of course, and that would be weird. Yeah.
Things you had no experience before, like words that you've never heard before, just appear in your mind. Like, good Lord,
exactly. Like that's like schizophrenia almost.
No, but it's like, oh well, UC Boulder didn't appeal to me, and like, but you're someone who loves nature, and it's just,
that would be surprising. It's like, why though?
But these things you're saying aren't surprising. Like, they align well with who you are, and I think that's one thing I didn't hear as much when you were just saying that. It's almost like there was some, almost, true mystery to the thoughts that were emerging. And there's sometimes that can be the case, but for the most part, I feel like there's an important distinction to make there, that thoughts reflect who you are. So.
That is, you're right. It is a very important distinction. It might just come down to a matter of phrasing, because it's like
I agree. Adam, you seem to come back to like a lot of specific phrases that I think probably hold some like personal value to you. Like who you are, you say a lot, but I'm not sure like if like that holds extra meaning.
Well, can I clarify?
Yeah, sure.
What I was thinking about is like the idea of someone's character, I think, is super useful here. So something can be in character for someone, like me liking UC Boulder. It can be very out of character, like me not liking UC Boulder. And I don't understand how that connection has anything to do with freedom or free will. That is hugely valuable if we're either trying to evaluate another person, or if we're even sort of trying to evaluate ourselves or like question a decision. But it's just that, but like even like, I don't know. It's just, you can ask sort of like, could you have done otherwise for any part of a process? Well, I don't think you have to admit that process is not is consequential to keep in mind,
Yeah, no, I get where you guys are coming from. I think there might be some, Giffen might be right. It's some at least concepts at least appeal a lot more to me here, because like
they appeal to me too. It's just I'm viewing them differently.
I've already conceded like you don't choose who you are. I mean, but at the same time, like I don't, I guess, subscribe as fervently to the randomness of thoughts, in the sense that like you do not control your thoughts, but your thoughts are who you are.
And they are predictable in the sense that like the more you know about someone or the more you know about yourself, it's like
or the more you know about like the human brain.
Yeah, exactly. Like it would be like I don't know, make up some decision that like I'm probably going to have to come to at some point. Like there are ways that I could make that decision a deliberative decision that would be very surprising to me. But it's like, and there are obviously more ways that it wouldn't be surprising. But again, I just don't like help me understand, Adam, why that has to do with like freedom for you, as opposed to just saying that's valuable. And maybe I don't even understand how exactly it's valuable, and maybe like the future readings will shape that. But I don't understand why that draws back to any implications of freedom for you.
Well, I think it just goes back to framing.
Okay.
I mean, because like, so your thoughts are you, and your thoughts inform your actions. So, ultimately you're able to behave, based on who you are. And I think that there is some freedom in that, to me at least, even though Giffen brought up the example of, winding up, some sort of some toy and just letting it play out on its own. I think it's I don't think that seems to align with the subjective experience. I mean, if like the toy, like you'd have to make the toy as complicated as we are to begin to even kind of create the illusion of free will at that point. But I'm saying it's a very if I'm conceding to the illusion, which I'm happy to do, then I'm saying powerful illusion, and I think that I've just explained why.
I think this might honestly be just a purely terminological distinction.
It could be.
Honestly, whenever you agreed that it was an illusion, but a strong illusion, I thought you would like come over. But then you say there is some freedom in it, and I still don't see like the connection, frankly.
Maybe only in the subjective aspect of it. So, but I mean, I actually, this is where we really differ at this point, because your facial expressions after that are totally did it for me, because it's like, you guys have you don't feel any subjective control over what you do.
No, I do.
Okay.
But it's an illusion. We agree on that.
Okay, yeah, strong illusion, right?
Yeah. So okay.
Yeah.
We're on the same.
I'm not living in some sort of hellscape where I feel no connection to.
No, of course.
Well, I thought that for a second too, because I was like, very strong illusion.
No.
You guys both give me that the kind of quizzical look, and I'm like, really? You've completely.
Oh no, the quizzical look was why that relates to. Not whether that's true. I can't decide whether I think that you are a compatibilist about free will and determinism, or if you're an incompatible determinist and you're sort of importing your views about like moral responsibility compatibilism onto this debate or not. And I don't know if we're going to understand that until we move into the next readings.
Yeah, I'm certainly either one of those.
Yeah, clearly.
Yeah, I
because it's like, because I don't know, it's just maybe we don't have the language of the papers that we're going to read to like fully flesh it out. But it's like everything you're saying to me is, if you're a compatibilist, you're a very special kind of one then, because you're not like your argumentation is not what most compatibilists tend to be on it. It's like most compatibilists tend to do something akin to what Dennett does. Like there are different versions of it, but like roughly it's some version of what Dennett does, where he says like, but determinism was never the question. Like that's never what we thought was the issue. What's really the issue, he almost says something like this simple conditional analysis where it says an agent has the ability to do otherwise if and only if, were that agent to choose to do otherwise, then that agent would do otherwise. And to me, that just totally misses the point. Like that's a tautology. It's like if things happen differently, then they happen differently. And like, of course that's true. But like,
for me, I'm kind of the exact opposite in a way, actually.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to point out. Yeah.
I'm actually like,
the opposite of Dennett in this case.
Yeah.
Yeah, because the thing is, like, for me, when you said that, some compatibilists might say determinism was like never the question. For me, it's almost like libertarian free will was never the question, in the sense that like I concluded like what we concluded back in 10th grade of high school that it didn't make any sense. So it's like now when I've tried like reframing my views on free will, that libertarian free will wasn't really in the question. I flirted with it just briefly, but. So, like the question is like, is there some sense in my mind of free will that I can still preserve? Not can, but do I still preserve?
I'm interested in whether after we do maybe not the next reading, because I kind of have a way of how we might want to set it up, but like maybe the next few readings, if you say actually, yeah, all these concerns they're just related to a different debate or not. I'm just curious.
I mean, I'm starting to think they are, because I mean, like, I tend to agree on every single point you guys raise here. that there really is no freedom. There really isn't. But to me, like, the process rationally choosing among options and using some sort of moral framework to do it, to me is like, okay, even if that is all causal, it's like, okay, there's something to that, but maybe it's not free. Yeah.
And that is almost everything that we care about. Like, is what people conclude at the end of that rational like dialogue with themselves, you know?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. I'm much happier at the end of, but not happier, but just satisfied with my understanding of your position at the end of this episode then.
Well, Adam, can you state your position?
Given's not quite.
Okay, so my position. Okay, all right. So here's where I'm at the end of this here.
I can give you a yes or no question if you prefer.
No, let Adam state it.
Give me the yes or no. I want to hear this no thing.
Is it a contradiction to say that, free will is a strong illusion, but in that strong illusion, there is freedom?
I think I just conceded right now that we are not ultimately free. Like, I mean, we're not. So,
Okay.
so yes, that is a contradiction.
Okay. I was like, Jesus Christ! If he says yes to this, we're not even halfway into the episode yet.
Well, that's the question that I asked earlier, but
Yeah.
he said like there's some freedom in there. So that's what I want to clarify.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess. But then, I mean, if you said, is it an illusion? And then I'm like, fine, yes. Fine. But I still stand by that original quote there, reason responsiveness. I think there is something to that, only if it's just moral responsibility.
Yeah.
So, but I think that definitely added like another layer when I was thinking about this whole thing. So.
Okay. Nice.
I'm really looking forward to that.
I am too.
Responsibility.
So what I think I'm going to do is, so for the next episode, I'm going to assign one reading and then another synopsis of a reading. But both actually will amount to I think less than 10 pages. So the what I'm going to assign, and I'll send you guys the PDFs to this, is it's called The Impossibility of Moral Responsibility by Galen Strawson. And I'm also going to send us a summary of Dirk Pereboom's 4-case argument against moral responsibility. So what we'll do is, I think this will be a good way to do it. That will be kind of the strong conclusion, and then the subsequent papers that we'll read will be ways of resisting that strong conclusion. And I think that'll be a good way to do it. That'll be kind of the punch, and then we'll read ways of resisting that conclusion after it. Okay, nice. All right, well, I'm looking forward to the rest of the series, and we'll leave it off there for listeners, and I hope you're enjoying it as well. So if you are, tune in to the rest of it.